welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Jake Dreier with HiLabs, and we are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. And today I have the pleasure with speaking with Krister Johnson, who is the Chief Analytics Officer at Healthfirst. Krister, welcome.
Welcome, Jake. Nice to be here.
You are one of the people that is serving as a pioneer for thinking about how healthcare can utilize these tools to create a better patient member experience. But we know that healthcare is an incredibly slow moving industry. So I'd love to hear, as one of the data pioneers that's trying to shift the discussion, I'd love to hear about, what are the challenges that you face and what are the ways that you currently try to address those challenges, overcome them, and be one of the people that is helping shift the industry.
Yeah. Wow. Lots of challenges.
Yeah, I think lots to unpack there.
I'll speak in general terms in the healthcare industry. So I've been doing data analytics for almost 30 years now. I started out in consulting, doing supply chain analytics, logistics network. I was doing logistics optimization and simulation models. I then got into more of the customer next best action, customer journey type analytics. And I've been focused on healthcare for the last 9 years. And what struck me when I first entered back in 2013, really focusing on healthcare, is in most other industries, there is one metric that makes it very easy to figure out, like, if you're going to build a machine learning model, what your target variable is going to be, the thing you're trying to impact. Ultimately, it's some form of profit or margin. And you can take that back in a lot of different ways. It's relatively easy to do that. But in healthcare, as you can imagine, while yes, margin is important and all businesses are trying to focus on that, the thing we're trying to change is often the behavior of members in ways that will make them healthier. And that can be there can be a lot of debate over how you should really focus on defining for this population of people, how are we going to define if they're healthier? I've seen recently debates for diabetes as an example. Most people say the metric to focus on is we want to lower everyone's A1C level. And that makes perfect sense. I've read articles recently that say maybe there's some negative externalities of doing that. I won't get into that because I'm not a doctor, and that's not my area to focus on. But I think just the debate around anytime you're trying to improve people with the overall health of somebody with a particular condition, really focusing on what's the metric at which you're going to drive success. That is a challenge right at the start. So before you even done any analysis, there's this debate that happens at the start. And then ultimately over time, one of the big challenges is because changing somebody's behavior to buy a product or subscribe to a service is it's a whole different animal than trying to get somebody to change their behavior in long-term ways to improve their overall health. And so these are some of the areas that just make what we're trying to do from an AI and ML perspective in healthcare more challenging. But there's a third thing that's not around just kind of inherent. Those are things we can't change. Those are things we have to deal with in healthcare. They're just a reality of what we're doing. But there's things that we as the healthcare industry can do, I think, that to improve and accelerate the way we can get value from AI and ML. And that is, I have noticed over the last 9 years, there is a tendency for people in the field to say we want to wait to do AI and ML until we perfect our data. We got to spend a lot of time. We got to get our data perfect, and then I'll worry about how we can apply ML. And again, I've been doing this for 30 years. That is an absolutely false and incorrect viewpoint, because every time that before data is perfect, if I start to go build an ML model, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to understand all of the underlying relationships between outcome variables and input variables. And in doing that, what better way is there to identify where you have problems in data quality? Part of every model building process is to do some exploratory data mining to just understand what's going on in your data in a statistical way. That process involves highlighting differences. We almost every time in the beginning of a model in this exploratory data mining process, that first step, almost always we find anomalies in the data that don't make sense, and we have to say, oh, usually it's we didn't pull the data right or something like that, but sometimes we identify underlying issues. And then the other thing it does is it really helps you, that process I just described helps you really focus on what data is most important, what are the things that are most highly correlated with the outcomes and the metric improvements that we're trying to aspire to.
And when you're thinking about all these different metrics and all these different, I think, outcomes that you can aspire to, how do you prioritize, which solutions and which issues to focus on? I think especially because, AI and ML is being touted all over the healthcare industry as AI ML for this, AI ML for this. And, you've alluded to the fact there are some great use cases for AI ML, and there's some that are very nascent. But then even within the great use cases, you can't boil the ocean. You have to choose as an institution, right? Ideally, there'd be unlimited resources, but there isn't, right? Teams can only focus on tackling so many issues. So yeah, just talk to us about how you and your team prioritize the solutions and the areas that you seek to transform and change.
Well, I'll admit at the start that this is an area we have to get better at too. And I think we're probably not alone. I think a lot of people are striving to get better in this. I think there's two ways to go about doing this. I'll first answer it in the context of kind of clinical analysis, and then I'll switch to an operational perspective. From a clinical perspective, I think figuring out the opportunities, a lot of people will go to where the biggest spend is, and they'll just focus on, here's an area where there's a lot of spend. And I think there's a risk to doing that, because just because you have a big spend in a particular area, or a lot of people are incurring healthcare in this area, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's where all the opportunity for improvement or cost savings is. And so I like to think of leveraging analytics. There's plenty of episodic groupers out there that group claims into episodes and help you calculate an expected cost for a particular healthcare episode, whatever it is. And then it helps you automatically compare the expected cost to actual cost. And when there's a delta between the expected cost, if you leverage all the data across a wide population of people and you apply for any particular doctor or any particular practice, and they've got a wide gap between expected cost and actual cost, that's where I think there's a lot of opportunity. Now, a lot of people will say we should focus on where there's avoidable costs, and there's a lot of different logic and things out there to figure out where there's avoidable costs, and that's certainly a very viable approach. That's another one. I just happen to think that the more you can put your focus in building algorithms that can, even at the individual member level, estimate on a regular basis, weekly, monthly, what the expected cost is for that person or for that episode, and then identify where your actual cost is differing from the expected cost, that's where you should focus your time. And then again, as we said earlier, you can aggregate that up. If you do that analysis at the lowest level possible, and then leverage analytical techniques to then aggregate that, and then where you see the biggest differences between expected and actual, that's where I think you should focus the time. So that is where we're aspiring to go. We're trying to do that. As you can imagine, it takes some time to build all those algorithms at scale and get those to be operationalized. And so we're in the process of doing that. But I think that's really important, especially on the clinical side. That whole notion on the operational or the finance side of the house, that whole notion of figuring out ways to calculate what's expected and then comparing that to actual also applies, but there's another level to it on the operations side. That's where I think you've got these notions of statistical process controls, where you're not even bothering to calculate expected or actual, but you're just saying, all right, here's what's happening on a daily basis at these detailed fine levels, like let's say claims for an individual NPI for an individual doctor. And at scale, we can actually look at that across all of the doctors, all tens of thousands of doctors that are in our network. And we can look for just statistically if there's one metric or variable for that at that individual level for that doctor. If there's one variable that's more than one standard deviation away for any particular time frame, say a week or a month, then we should alert that. And that might require some additional diagnostic investigation or some diagnostic analytics. And so there's this, for me, the way that I go about and thinking about how we can do a better job prioritizing where we spend our time from an AI and ML perspective is figuring out how to estimate the expected values of whatever metric you're looking at, and then compare that to actual on a scaled, operationalized way across as much rich data sources as you can. And then also, wherever possible, apply statistical process controls so that you know where there's variance to what you've seen in the past, and you highlight those as alerts for further investigation. That's how we're planning to do it going forward. And I think those are both techniques that have been applied very well across a lot of different other industries.
Yeah. So you just talked about the areas that you're prioritizing, I think, given the current solutions. Krista, this has been an awesome conversation. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing these insights. It's a great opportunity to be able to talk with a thought leader like yourself.
Well, thanks, Jake. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I definitely appreciate your time as well. So thank you.
Of course.